All right. I hereby call this session of the Student Fees Committee to order. Madam Clerk, you may proceed with roll call.
When I call your name, please respond with here or present. Chairman James.
Here.
Student Body Vice President Camila Gums.
Here.
Speaker of the Senate Jacob Tubak.
Here.
Budget and Finance Chair John Kirk.
Present.
Fine Arts Representative Nathan Rongish.
Here.
Engineering Representative Saivikas Reddy Baduri. Graduate Representative Jacqueline Villa.
Present.
Liberal Arts and Sciences Representative Letitia Murdoch.
Present.
Honors Representative Gladys Heitzman.
Present.
Health Professions Representative Tegan Altenberg.
Present.
Business Representative John Rami.
Present.
Applied Studies Representative Alex Gallegos. Association Advisor Gabriel Fonseca.
Present.
Vice President Student Affairs Dr. Terry Hall.
Present.
Vice President Finance and Administration Werner Goling.
Present.
University Budget Director David Miller.
Present.
Director of Financial Aid Shilu Surrender.
Present.
Budget Office Lindsay Pletcher.
Present.
Budget Office Jason Post.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, 18 members are present. We have met quorum.
All right. Thank you for that. You may proceed to the next item.
Discuss process, schedule, and expectations.
And Advisor Fonseca, you have the floor. Molly does that. Is it okay to recess for like 5 minutes? All right, so we'll stand in recess. All right. So we are now back to order. It is my opinion that the whole committee is here, so we will now proceed with Advisor Fonseca's presentation.
Right, it is not a student fees hearing without technology problem, so good off to start off with some tradition there. So I quickly just want to go over the process for the next 2 days, as well as the schedule in public so that everyone kind of knows what is going on. So if you open your binder, the second page in there lists out the schedule for today. We're going to kind of quickly go over process and schedule and a little bit of expectations, turn it over to do the full revenue estimates from the budget office, and then we'll have an opportunity for public forum. At that time is when members of the committee can address the committee to present a statement if you have one, and or members of the public to do so as well. Then we'll take a break and go for lunch, and then come back this afternoon at 1 o'clock to begin hearings. Today you'll hear from the executive branch with a proposal that they've been working on. Then you'll hear from student engagement, advocacy, and leadership, followed by student conduct and community standards, and the WSU varsity esports, and then we'll wrap up the day with the shifts-based gallery. Tomorrow we'll return at 9:30, so it's a little bit earlier tomorrow morning, where you'll hear a budget enhancement. We'll take care of a couple things committee business-wise, but then you'll hear a budget enhancement from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And then Campus Recreation will present their budget, followed by a new request from the Tilford Commission, the Ulrich Museum. And then we'll break for lunch and then begin the fun process of deliberating the budget. And we will adjourn once the committee has made a recommendation of the student fees budget. Are there any questions about the schedule? Yes. Oh, sorry, that's your job.
Dr. Hall.
We have secured institutional funding for Passage to Success. So Director Sanchez, Assistant Dean Sanchez would not need to present tomorrow. We can pull that request out.
Question for you, Gabe. Is there any procedure we go through to do that? Is it just taken out?
Yeah, we'll just take them out, and then we can adjust the schedule. So we might, with that, we could probably start later tomorrow. So we'll talk about that over lunch to redo the schedule if we need to.
I was just gonna say, as Dr. Hall said, if you look on tomorrow's presentation, it's the first actual presentation, Passage to Success Enhancement. We won't be doing that, so you can take it out.
Okay, and then generally for other folks who are maybe watching, the student government last year introduced a new process of reviewing our student fees budgets, and we began a 3-year allocation cycle in lieu of every year hearing about 22 different budgets, including our EOF account. This year, we have started our 3-year staggered review, which means that each year we'll hear about a third of the budget. This year, as I mentioned, you'll see those that are listed in year A on the screen. And then next year, Student Fees Committee will focus on year B, and then the following year, year C. So what that means from a budgetary standpoint is that once, for example, once year A is approved, then it's frozen for the next 3 years, unless they return for an adjustment to their budget, and the same following that. So this year, instead of a thick binder that we used to have, we now go down to only a couple, I don't even know, maybe 90 pages instead of a couple hundred. So that's exciting for you all as well. In addition, the Student Fees Committee now approves an allocation on a per student basis. And so what that means is that we try and understand the decisions that you all make or the recommendations you all make, what that looks like on a per student basis. So instead of saying that we're approving $1 million budget for a certain area, we present the fact that we're approving a $10 budget so that a student can understand of their $395 that they pay right now, how much of that is spread through the different areas that are allocated through student fees. So, so tomorrow when we begin deliberations, you'll hear the big number, and then you'll hear what that results into on a per student allocation as well. And then the recommendation that goes forward to the full student senate is on a per dollar allocation as well. Tomorrow, you'll also have the opportunity to have discussion around 3 different funding strategies that were created last year. This allows you to do 3 different things. One is to produce an increase to a budget over the course of 3 years. We have one of those examples this year with Student Health Services, and so we'll discuss that tomorrow, as they're the first one that actually got to do that last year from the committee. The second option that you get to do is just to keep the budget the way it is, and it doesn't change from year to year over the course of the 3 years. Or the third option is to begin a percent funding decrease to a certain line item, and that would decrease over the next 3 years as well. So those are 3 options that are available to the committee. Following after that, tomorrow we'll also have a discussion, and I'll let David talk about this in just a little bit, about a cost of living increase. The student government last year, or 2 years ago, created a policy that we consider this a separate line item instead of putting it into the budgets. And so there is one this year or a consideration of one from the state, and I'll let David talk about that when we get into his budget presentation. And then the last thing, which aren't happening anymore, but it was on the schedule, so I'm going to quickly go over it, and then we'll move on from there. We also created an opportunity for an allocation enhancement, which is a one-time cash flow into a certain area, which allows entities who are not up for review to submit requests. That was the example with the Passage to Success enhancement, but since that's not happening, we're just going to skip over that and move on. Any questions or comments? Zach, before we start hearings this afternoon, we'll kind of walk you through committee procedures about when you can ask questions and when you can speak and all those things. So I'll let him take care of that this afternoon. But any general questions for me about the general process of student fees? So everybody's ready and excited now. That's what I love to hear. All right, then that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that, Advisor Fonseca. Madam Clerk, we can proceed to the next item.
Revenue estimates.
All right. And David, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is David Miller from the University Budget Office, and I have a quick presentation for you all just to kind of walk you through the revenue estimates to help you as you work on building your budget. Before I get to the revenue estimate, though, there are just a few things that I want to touch on. First of all, and I think it's important for all of us and the audience to recognize that this is really a really long process for development of this budget, and it kicked off back in November when Lindsay Pletcher, who I'm incredibly grateful for all of her hard work on this effort, made the call for a request. And this process actually won't wrap up until we get into first late May, when what all of you adopt and the president approves is submitted to the Kansas Board of Regents, and normally they make their adoption in late June. It's also important for us to know that the president and K-Board do have the authority to make adjustments to whatever your adopted recommendations are. During my tenure here at the university, I've never seen the president do that, and last year was the first time that I ever experienced the Kansas Board of Regents taking that type of action. This just outlines for you your overall budget. In the sense of the university's total budget of almost $500 million, this is a pretty small piece, but yet your budget is really important in the sense of the direct services that are delivered to the students. And I think it's also important to recognize this budget is such a great microcosm of the dynamics that go on in building the overall university budget. And what I mean by that is some of the issues that all of you will be dealing with are very similar to the issues that the university administration has to wrestle with. And it's a great example about all of the challenges that go into the funding of higher education in the state of Kansas. So I think that's kind of a neat experience for all of you. This slide just gives you a quick historical breakdown of what the Tier 1 rates have looked like over the last 3 or 4 years. And then at the bottom, you can see that for 2022, SGA and your adopted recommendations adopted a 1% increase, which would have taken that Tier 1 rate to $410.92. And then the Board of Regents, during their adoption, made some changes. And basically, the Board of Regents last year had 2 concerns. One was they were not supportive of any fee increases, and that was true for all of the higher education institutions, not just Wichita State. And then the second was the Board of Regents felt strongly that if there was any type of bond refinancing that was built into the budget, that those savings should go back directly to the students. And last year's budget was built on some bond refinancing. We refinanced the bonds for the Raggan Student Center, which did create savings overall, and you guys took advantage of those savings when you built your budget. But because the Board of Regents had a different perception of how those savings should be utilized, that forced us and you to adjust the budget so that there was actually a 2.9% reduction in the fee from the previous year, which brought the fee rate for Tier 1 to $395.08. And then this slide just gives you a more detailed outline of kind of the budget comparison between what the Kansas Board of Regents did in comparison to what your original adopted budget was. That change related largely to the refinancing of the debt, reduced the revenue collections by $342,000. And that $342,000, all of you took action to address that through 2 avenues. The first was to utilize your rainy day reserve, your cash that you've saved up over time, and allocate that to the programs in order to mitigate the size of a budget cut that would have to occur otherwise. And then the second avenue was an across-the-board reduction to all of the programs with the exception of the Education Opportunity Fund of 1.62%. And that generated $122,000 in savings. So overall, those 2 items are what made up that $342,000. So that's enough of talking about last year. Let's talk about this year. So the revenue estimate is largely driven by 2 items. One is going to be whatever your fee rate is, and then whatever the head count or student count is that's expected. And this graph gives you an outline kind of historically what 2020 actuals look like for a total, and then a breakdown by each semester in comparison to 2021 actuals, and then what it's currently looking like for 2022. We currently have actuals for fall and spring, where summer is an estimate, and then for the 2023 estimate. It looks like this year we have some pretty strong growth. We're at about 1.8%, and then the projection for next year for 2023 is about 0.4%. That would bring your base revenue estimate to $9,742,000. So that does not include any increase in the fee. That would assume that's an estimate based on if you were to leave the fee flat and unchanged. This table just gives you more of a breakdown, more detailed breakdown of what goes into the calculations, and as you go down to the right, you can see, again, the total estimate of the $9,742,000. I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but do want to make sure that you have that more detailed breakdown if you're interested. And then this slide is kind of a budget scenario slide, if you will. And so as you look at the very top, you have a breakdown of if you were to consider any type of increases in the current rate, what would each 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% rate increase correlate to in the sense of both the revenue generation as well as what the Tier 1 rate would be. And then below that on the expenditure side, you kind of have a breakdown of at least from my vantage point, of some of the key items that are kind of on the table for your consideration as you work through this budget. And just to walk through these with you real quick, for item number 1, if you were to consider restoring those across the board cuts that occurred last year, that would be at about $122,889. maybe I should back up just a second because there's an important piece that I missed. If you look at the current expenditure budget there in the middle, what you adopted, including that $220,000 in cash from your rainy day reserve, was $9,731,000. I think it's important that we recognize that with the new revenue estimate, and with a base of $9,742,000, that means that in theory you could adopt last year's budget with no fee increase if you did not take into consideration all of these other items that I'm kind of walking you through. So I think that's an important foundation for all of you to understand. So now going back into that list, number 2, increases for those not up for review. What that means is Gabe outlined for you that with the new 3-year schedule, there are some programs that have been adopted and won't be up for review again for another 2 years now at this point. But the way the calculation is supposed to work is that if there is an increase in headcount or student fees, because their rate per tier, I think you called it student allocation, which is a great way to frame it. Their student allocation within that tier 1 rate is going to stay the same until they come up again for readoption. And so the Radigan Student Center here, you can see what their tier 1 rates are, actually what each tier rate is for that student allocation. And then you can see that based on that, with that headcount growth, we would expect them to receive a slight increase in their overall budget simply because of that headcount growth. Does that kind of make sense? When you do that for all of the programs, it's a pretty small number of almost $6,000. Number 3, and from what Dr. Hall outlined, this number has already changed, but if you were to adopt all of the requested increases that are in this binder before you, that would total $250,000. Number 4, there are employees that are funded within these operations, and each year the fringe benefits, health benefits, retirement, those types of things traditionally go up a little bit. In order to cover those costs, that would require an additional $13,000. Number 5, your journal calls for you to allocate to your reserve, or what I'll call your rainy day reserve, 1% of whatever your adopted budget is. That would be equivalent to about $97,000 in this current structure right now today. And past committees have had choices to make in regards to that. And for example, last year the committee chose to do cash sweeps. And what that means is taking a look at all the different programs, the cash balances that they currently possess, and you do have the ability to capture that cash and reallocate it to your reserve. Now, one thing I would encourage you to consider if you decide to go down that path is sometimes you can look at the table that's in your binder of those cash balances, and some of those balances may look relatively large. However, there might be a reason why that program is retaining that cash balance. They may have computers, or in health services, they may have equipment that need to be replaced. And so they are intentionally trying to build up that cash balance in order to take those financial actions at some point in the future. So it is worthwhile to ask them, or allow us, or to ask them a question as to if there is a reason to why those balances, if they are deemed to be high, why that might be, just so you can make an educated decision. Number 6, compensation increases. So again, there are employees that are funded through these budgets. The Governor Kelly did recommend in her recommended budget a 5% adjustment for all state employees. At this stage now, that is currently in the hands of the Kansas legislature. We don't know what the Kansas legislature is going to do. And most likely we won't know that until May. The legislature may choose to adopt a 5% increase. They may choose to adopt a 2% increase. They may choose to adopt a 0% increase. And so all of you will have to decide if you're willing to possibly set any funding aside so that the programs that do have personnel, that any type of increases would be covered. I know that's a really difficult conversation to have right now because there's a lot of moving parts and there's no, it's not known what that is going to be. But in the sense of that microcosm that I was talking about regarding the university's overall budget, that's the exact same thing that we're dealing with in trying to build that budget and put it together. Last two items, I believe SGA has been looking at what it would take to do a compensation increase for employees to bring everyone, or student employees to bring everyone up to $10 an hour. I'm not an expert on that proposal, but the estimate for that cost is $180,000. And then the last one, number 8, and I should have outlined, none of these are in any type of order, so they're not in any type of priority ranking or anything like that. The university, again, related to the employees that are funded through this budget, the university has been going through a process to evaluate employee pay and assign employees to a pay range. And what that is resulted in is that we've discovered that some employees are paid below what a minimum pay range would be for their job description and their job duties. And so in order to bring that mix of employees up to that very minimum pay range, that would require additional funding of about $23,500. Any questions on this slide? Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Zach.
Speaker Tubak.
Do you know what the updated total would be without Passage to Success?
Lindsay, do you know how much passage?
I think that was a $24,000 request.
So that would reduce line 3 from the 250,000 to 225. Any other questions? Here at the top, this slide just talks about your cash balance again regarding that requirement of setting aside 1% of the budget. You started this year with a cash balance of $662,000, which is a good, strong cash balance and does give you some opportunities as you're looking at how to build your budget. If you take into account that you utilize $220,000 of that cash balance in order to mitigate the budget cuts after the K-Board adoption, but you also contributed an additional $97,000, that means that your ending balance this year is likely to be around $540,000. So that is still a pretty good, strong cash balance. And again, the intent of that provision in the journal, I believe, is to try and get you to $1 million cash balance. Then below that, just reiterating how that contribution to the cash balance was addressed last year by looking at the cash sweeps. And then finally, to close out, this table just gives you a more detailed breakdown of the tier rates and the breakdown between fall and spring rate versus summer. And I can send this out to any of you if you'd like to have it as backup information. And that closes out the presentation. Any questions I can answer?
Are there any other questions for the speaker? Oh, Speaker Tubak.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a question that you can answer or maybe Gabe can answer, but about the cash balances, could you just give us some insight onto why that $1 million was the threshold?
So yeah, we had that conversation 2 years ago, and the main aspect of it was back in the day, the student government used to have something that they called supplemental funding, where when issues like what we experienced this past year, or even the year before, when we reduced our budget due to the onset of the pandemic, was designed to provide funding set aside so that if these issues happen, or a dramatic decrease in enrollment, or just issues overall with the budget, that there were dollars and resources set aside that the Student Fees Committee and the student government could consider to utilize to step in to solve some of those things. again, previously in the past, they also utilized those dollars for one-time contributions or one-time expenditures that were some of them significantly larger that they didn't want to necessarily tap into the student fees budget to deal with, but had dollars aside to utilize to do that. When we got to the $1 million, there was a discussion we had with the budget office of what is a healthy reserve that the student government should consider in their own student fees reserves, and that came out to be $1 million of doing that. I think since I've been here, it has been years since that account has really ever had money put into it. I think previous years student government used it without necessarily replacing it. And so we're on the fun journey of now trying to rebuild it back up and ensure that we have those dollars there. Like David mentioned last year, instead of taking it from the student fees budget, they just took it from cash balances. And then the year before that, they put some dollars into it as well so that they had that. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Dr. Hall?
$1 million is basically 10% of the budget, and so that was deemed as an appropriate level to have set aside where money went where we're supposed to go, but then set aside as a safety net.
If I could add to, historically, if we think about it historically, when I first came to the university about 7 or 8 years ago, and the first probably 4 SGA budgets that I worked on, there was no rainy day reserve or cash balance. And at that time, we were encountering some complications with headcount and student growth. And so that meant that essentially every single year, SGA was kind of faced with making budget cuts and really difficult decisions. And that doesn't mean that necessarily goes away because you now have a cash balance, but it does give you options that you wouldn't otherwise have. And a little bit of freedom in which if the university does start to experience those types of concerns and issues, that maybe you can spread things out over multiple years as opposed to having to do everything at one single time.
Are there any other questions?
Which is what we did right last year when we looked at the overall reduction to the student fees or the fee allocation from the regions. As you saw on, I'm just going to go back really quick. So if you see on this screen, right, so the original change was going to be $342,000. Because we had that cash balance, we were able to pull some of the dollars, a substantial amount of those dollars out of it, and then just made a smaller cut a permanent cut to the actual budget while supplementing some of those costs. Now, right there is always an issue when you tap into your reserves is it's not permanent dollars, and so we just pushed it down a year, and thankfully our projection of revenue, and correct me if I say this wrong, helped us address that issue because now there's a new base estimate that we didn't necessarily have last year, so it kind of canceled each other out in some way. That's not the right fiscal way of saying it, but that's the way that I'm going to explain it.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, David, for your presentation. Madam Clerk, we may proceed to the next item.
Public forum.
All right, so the association provided an opportunity for the community to speak to the committee via Zoom. Advisor Fonseca, has anyone reached out to speak to the committee?
No.
All right, seeing none. In compliance with the association bylaws, each member, upon recognition, is entitled to offer an opening statement. Are there any members wishing to present an opening statement at this time? All right, seeing none. We are ahead of schedule, and I believe that we're scheduled to have lunch next, but President Khan and Vice President Gums is ready to speak on their proposals now to essentially give us a longer lunch. So with that, we will be hearing
All right, hello everyone. My name is Raja Khan. I serve as the student body president. I want to start off by saying thank you to all of you for serving on student fees and going over this budget, because of all the people, I understand how difficult and thorough this process is. So thank you for your service. Today, myself and Vice President Gums, we will be talking to you about an executive proposal we are presenting to you as the committee, as the Student Fees Committee. There are 3 different action items we wanted to propose as we see these areas that can be resolved through the work you are doing here. So before I get into it, I do want to clarify that these are issues that we understand that obviously do exist, such as compensation, that can directly be addressed through student fees as it is money relating. So the very first thing when we look at is student assistant compensation plan. Now, there are 128 student employees positions that are funded through student fees. Now, that is not all the student employee positions on campus, but those are the ones you all will be funding through this process. We recognize that each department obviously funds their positions differently. It might be that there's a, let's say, front desk assistant in one office or one department, and then the other department has that same position. They all might compensate their students differently. Some might give them minimum wage, some might give them $10 or more. But it depends which office you are with, and they might be doing the same amount of work. We want to bring all of our student employees, again, that are funded through student fees to this $10 per hour compensation plan. And we want this to become an effort that you all help us start resolving. We want students to be paid $10 per hour, not just through student fees, but we want our university to follow suit and take this as an initiative as they're looking at the market-based compensation plan for the, full-time employees. So based on that, we obviously are trying to make this change. As you can see on the screen, there are 3 different options that you have. You have $10, you have $11, and you have $12. We want to start with 10, as we understand that this will be an increase to student fees, and we want to make sure that we're starting at a point where we can find ourselves, let's say a year or 2 years from now, saying, yes, this is something we can sustain our budget with, and we can allow our students to be paid $10 per hour rather than just jumping to 12. So that being that reasoning. And additionally, we will be creating a process that ensures that that $10 per hour that might be approved by you all goes towards student employee positions rather than other projects. We obviously want to make this change, but we also want to confirm that this is something that if we are making this our goal, this is where the money goes rather than to a different project, which we might have not intended to fund. So that is the first topic. Is there anything you'd like to add, Camila?
And my only addition to that is that these are conversations we've been having since the previous session, as we presented ways to ensure that student employees on campus are paid a little bit better, try to be as competitive as we can, and of course, as you can see, going up to the most competitive prices that we can, as right now is a lot of money, but we do want to ensure that we start off somewhere with the $10 per hour.
All right, and with that, this is our second proposal for you all, the market-based compensation plan. That is something our university is already engaging in. They're looking at different departments, how much an employee is being paid, and how are they going to bring those employees up to the market-based compensation plan that is in place. Now, when we look at the full-time employees that are paid through student fees, some of them you could consider as underpaid, not just through this process, but through the university process as well. We have lost, I would say, a lot of great employees that have really helped our journey as students become way better and different than what it would have been otherwise. And to see those people leave because of unfair compensation, that obviously is something we cannot change as a whole for our university, but the positions we fund through student fees, we can provide that resource, and we can provide those additional dollars to bridge that gap pay we have alongside, I would say national, I don't know how to word this, but that is in place nationally, I guess?
Just bridge the competitive gap within the state and nationally as well, yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Camila. And so we want to propose that you all adopt a $23,507 to allocate a fund to allow all positions to be increased to the market-based pay. So that is our second goal. And Camila, would you like to add on to that? No? All right. And then the last thing is we would like to restore the budget. Last year, student fees had obviously proposed an increase to what we were wanting to do with our amount. When that student fees proposal was taken to Kansas Board of Regents, we, instead of seeing the acceptance of that increase, we saw a decrease of 1.62%. Now we want to make sure that our budget is balanced. We want to ensure that we are not in a place in the future where we're still trying to make up the cost we have lost in the year prior. So this being a very self-explanatory one, we just want to be brought back to that, for the lack of better words, that zero starting point that existed as to how much money was being put towards the different departments, and this being our way of making sure that we have the starting amount what we wanted last year to be brought back. So it's not us asking then, restoration is not an increase. It is basically us taking our budget to what it was before. So that is all I have for that. So as you all are looking at the proposals, the three things, restoration, market-based compensation, and then student employee compensation. Those are the three goals we have, and we truly believe that if we are to solve these issues on our campus as a wide, and if we want to start someplace, student fees is the place to do that. And I know you all will be going through these budgets thoroughly. You will understand this process much more better than a lot of different students on campus. And if you want to leave an impact through a lens of how do we fairly compensate people, and how do we think of this budget long-term rather than just short-term, I would encourage you all to take these proposals and consider them thoroughly. And if you have any questions, you can probably bring those to myself, Camila, Zachary James. I am so sorry. Or Gabe even. So we've all had these conversations, and we truly are passionate about making sure we're all paid well, and we are paid to a point where we don't have to constantly consider having 3 different jobs to just pay our bills. So that's our goal, and I hope you all are able to join us in it. So with that, I believe I stand for questions.
Are there any questions for the speaker? Representative Kirk.
Yes, so going off of everything that happened last year with this specific request and going further, what information that has the executive branch got from other students that are student workers and that are not student workers with this increase? Are they okay with it, and do they understand it?
Can you please rephrase that question?
Do the students of Wichita State, has the executive branch or has your members gone to students of WSU asking them about this increase, going to the $10 an hour for all student employees? Do the students understand what you're wanting to do, and do they understand that this money is going to come from student fees?
So when it comes down to going to students individually, that I necessarily wouldn't say has happened, because obviously the proposal itself and the student fees is a very complex process. If you were to just give that information, you would have to do a lot more explaining. And hence we have this student fees committee together, where we bring students that are not part of SGA from different spaces to provide that particular feedback. We identified student compensation as an issue because it is one. Seeing a student be paid, let's say, minimum wage while somebody else doing the same job is being paid twice as much, that in no place I would consider as fair. I believe that if we can bring everybody up to that $10 starting point, that gives us a place where we can say that student pay is important, and not just through the student fees process, it will be through the, I guess, the university lens, where they can model this after us once we are able to provide that feedback. Additionally, I would also say that when looking at, when looking at if you were to go to students asking them about this increase, I would say majority of them would be in favor of it. We have seen other campuses like KU move forward with efforts like this, and they have gotten support from their student body, as the student employees are also putting in that work that you would expect everybody else to put in as well. So Camila, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I also want to add that these also conversations that were started in the previous session, as well, as we all try to figure out how to improve the wages of students on campus, especially when we start to have more conversations around our international student population as well, who builds up most of the student employee base here on campus as well. So we're just following up on those conversations that started at least over a year ago.
Dr. Hall.
If I could say something in support, just as President Khan talked about the number of professional staff members that we've lost because they can get higher salaries other places, the same is true for our student assistants. Many of the 128 students that President Khan referenced work in student affairs, and we lose students all the time because they can make more money other places. They'd like to work on campus, but when they can make $12 someplace else, they're going to go for that. And so anecdotally, I've heard a great deal about how our student salaries is a deterrent for students working on campus.
And yeah, quickly to just add on to that one more, like there are places now that offer $20 per hour for their employees, and those are very basic jobs that students get from while they're in high school. I say that because I have a younger brother who gets paid a lot more than me, and good for him. But if there are students on college campuses who are looking for these professional opportunities to get a step in college and get that professionalism, I believe us even getting slightly close to what people like my brother get is not a bad thing.
Representative Rongish.
I was just going to ask, is the current minimum wage for student employees, is it just the Kansas minimum wage? People making, is it like $7.25 or something like that?
Yes, that is $7.25. And I know that for sure because when I first came onto this campus, I had a minimum wage job. And, you know, departments do end up giving increases, but it's over time, and it's only a few cents, like 25 cents for doing good work over the course of a year. So even with that, even if when you do see increases in student employee wages, it's not drastic, like moving from $7.25 to like $8. That's not it. You probably have to be in the role for over a year or more in order to get to even $8. So we're wanting to change that.
Any other questions? Representative Ramey.
Not bad. For the second proposal, committee adopts 23,507 to allow all positions to be increased. For the market-based pay, I was curious, how many full-time employees would that affect for us?
It's a David Miller question, I believe.
I don't know off the top of my head. I can bring that information back after we come back from lunch for all of you. So.
Dr. Hall?
We can get the exact numbers, but it's really for just the staff that are funded through these budgets. And so we're probably talking maybe 20 or so staff members, because I know some folks from GU budgets are underpaid and some folks from housing. So we're probably talking total maybe 20 or so.
Any other questions for the speakers? Seeing none, thank you so much for coming to present to us. Alright. So, with that presentation completed, we will, Almost lost the president. With that completed, we will adjourn for lunch until 1:30, but I ask that you be here at 1:15 to gavel it on time. So with that being said, you all are dismissed for lunch.